Hello, Maxim. Having a good show?
Yeah.
Great, awesome. So this is going to be an awesome session. I'm really excited to be here. I'm very excited to introduce Molly. I'm Daniel. I'm the co-CEO of Rypple, one of the founders. We do social performance management, which is like a modern approach to helping people get the best out of people. It's really an honor to introduce Molly because we've learned so much from her in working with Facebook and working with her. Probably embarrassing her, but there's probably not one person who's had more impact as a client on the vision of what we've been trying to do as a business and taught us more about what we're actually doing. So we feel it's a real special privilege to be here today. But before I tell you a little bit more about Molly, I want to talk a little bit about this social thing because it's certainly thrown around and risks becoming one of the most overused and meaningless words out there. If you have a chance, I highly recommend you pick up this month's Forbes magazine. Forbes magazine has a cover story called "Social Power and the Coming," "Social Power and the Coming Corporate Revolution." And it's a bit of a hype piece, but it's pretty interesting because the basic point that they're making is that we've seen over the past months this Arab Spring. We've seen totalitarian empires and governments that had literal police states, the ability to torture people and hold them down. We saw that these governments were toppled by people, in part, banding together on social software, coordinating and organizing together. And the article asks the question and poses the point that says, are corporations next? What corporate CEO is the next Mubarak? Now, maybe that's a bit over the top. But I do think there's a really deep underlying point that the way that people communicate and collaborate, and remember at the end of the day, companies are just groups of people that are communicating and collaborating together, is being rewired. An entirely new generation has grown up communicating in different ways, and this has pretty profound implications for all of our companies and your companies. But again, there's that word social. What does it mean? So I'll tell you what it doesn't mean, at least from our perspective. It doesn't mean process automation. That has been much of what software has been about for the past 30 years. Here's how you do something using documents and workflow. Let's automate it. And I think something that Molly taught us is that social means a really simple thing. It means amplifying existing behaviors. If you think about Facebook in the very beginning, the two behaviors that defined it were posting on walls and looking at people's pictures online, which came directly from college students who sat around looking at actual Facebooks and writing on each other's dorm room walls. The genius of what Facebook has done, they've done it better than anybody in the world, is designing products that take what people already do and amplifying it. And I know Molly will talk a bit more about it. So think about that. Social means amplifying existing behaviors, taking what people already do, even if it's a small spark, and making it really efficient. That's the second point I think social really defines. A lot of us think it's a toy, but it's not. The reason the spread of these organizations, the reason the spread of the Arab Spring, the reason I think of the growth of Facebook is it's very efficient for communicating. And efficiency is something that all of us should be paying attention to as we think about how we organize our companies. So I think we all therefore have a lot to learn from Facebook, and that's all why we're here. That's why we're here. But before we do learn, I think one of the things that often prevents us from learning is misconceptions. Often I'll say, hey, Facebook is our client. And they'll say, well, that's how Facebook works. They must be some sort of special magical kingdom in like Oz that it's very different from every other company. So I wanted to correct a couple misconceptions that I found from working with these folks. The first is, first of all, how many of you have seen the movie The Social Network? Everybody. Okay, right. So Facebook is not run out of a guest home in Palo Alto anymore. It's not a bunch of kids hanging out in the pool. In fact, the people who have staffed up Facebook and turned it into this incredible company are some of the most professional, experienced people from some of the best technology companies that the United States has to offer. These people are pros. And that's what the culture is there. Of course, they have something very special, which we'll hear, but make no mistake about it, this is an incredibly professionally run organization, which leads to the next thing. Oh, Facebook, it's kind of fun and games. Isn't that like throwing sheep or, poking people or something like that? Isn't that how it is there? And I can tell you definitively, no, it's not. Facebook, from what I can tell, and again, I don't work there, but I've spent a lot of time with them, is probably one of the most results-oriented, data-driven, and impact-focused companies you will meet. I mean, these people are very serious about getting stuff done. So when you talk about performance and how they get performance out of their people, it really matters. They're deadly serious about it. And with the state of the economy today, I think that rather than sort of having misconceptions, I think that all of us can do well to look at the growth of this business and say, what is it that they're doing? How are they unleashing talent like this? And how can we bring some of that back to where we work? Okay, so with that, let me talk a bit about Molly and embarrass her some more. She is a friend. So Molly went to Wesleyan, studied history, and then did what everyone who studies history at Wesleyan does. She became a wilderness river guide and learned how to do that. She then went to the Council on Foreign Relations and then went to Google to work in corporate communications. Moved over to Facebook, and promptly after about a month of corporate communication, moved into the HR organization and head up something called culture and engagement there, figuring out how do they take the pool house and scale it into a scalable organization, but still become incredibly results and impact driven. And she had huge success there. One other cultural quirk of Facebook is that engineers move into HR, and people from HR move into the product organization pretty frequently. So right now, Molly is no longer doing culture and engagement. She's actually a very senior person on their mobile products and partnerships, which, despite as much trying as I can, she will never tell me what she does. It's all very top secret. And last but not least, she's also an awesome person and a great speaker. So I think you're going to learn a lot. So please join me in welcoming Molly Graham from Facebook.
Yeah, so I'm here to talk to you guys today about millennials. I'm gonna try and do it up here, and if I feel too constrained, I might come down into the audience at some point. And if you can't hear at some point, just yell at me. So do me a favor, just so I understand my audience very quickly. How many of you guys use Facebook today? Okay, that's good. And just out of curiosity, how many of your companies block Facebook at work? Oh, that's actually less than I thought it was. How many of you are too embarrassed to actually tell me that your companies block Facebook at work? All right, so that's good for me to know. Like I said, what I want to talk to you guys today about is millennials. If you're just coming in, there's a lot of seats over on this side of the room if you want to walk around. This is a conversation that I know has been a big topic within probably this world, so the HR world, but also just in general. This generation, how they're different, their expectations of the workforce, and maybe how they're all out of whack. But before I talk really about HR or Facebook HR, millennials, or Facebook, what I want to talk to you guys about, I want to acknowledge something, which is that this is bigger than just the workforce, right? This generation and all of the generations that are going to follow it have a fundamentally different relationship with the world. And it's about everything. It's about their parents. It's about the way that they interact with their friends. It's about the rate of change that they expect from technology, from everything around them. And I think fundamentally for this audience, more than anything, it is about their relationship to technology. And the fact that it's fundamentally different than what has come before it. And that has big impacts beyond the workforce. Because in the end, excuse me, I'm ahead of myself. In the end, that these guys will end up being important audiences for you outside of the workforce as well. One of my favorite stories about this, because it tends to sort of blow my own mind, is a story that came out of when we were developing our most recent messaging product. And our product manager was having a conversation with one of his younger sister's friends, who was 18 at the time. And she was telling him how she thought email was really slow. And he was like, what? And she was talking about texting and IM and the fact that email just comparatively feels incredibly slow. So email is slow. It's crazy. For anybody that remembers the time when email didn't exist, this is an insane statement. But then if you look at it, it's actually true. Has anybody thought recently about what CC actually stands for? It stands for carbon copy. That's insane. That comes literally from snail mail, right? And yet we use it every day, and we've gotten used to it, and we don't think about it. Similarly, we actually did some research to figure out kind of how people used email and all of that, and our research showed that 80% of subject lines are either hey, hi, or left blank. That actually means that the subject line is out of, like that concept is out of date. So email is slow. Email is broken. This technology that only showed up however many years ago is already almost out of date. That's crazy. And by the way, this is just one example. The most important thing to understand, too, is that this generation may be tough. But think about the generations that are going to come after it. If anybody has ever seen a 5-year-old use an iPad, or even worse, a 5-year-old walk up to a desktop computer and try and like get the screen to move by touching it, and then they like pick up the mouse and they're like, what is this thing? That's what's next. Yeah? So this isn't just about the workforce, because in the end, these guys are your customers. They either are or will be your audience for your business. And so it's important to understand the mentality that defines these generations and their expectations for more than just the way that you manage people. So let's talk about the stereotypes of this generation and assume that the generations that come after this may only be more so. What I want to talk to you guys about today, well, it's my company. We're a millennial company for sure, and we'll talk about that. But I want to talk to you about why we think all these stereotypes and the behaviors and attitudes that have created them might actually be good things. I want to talk to you about the culture that we've built and the fact that it depends on these behaviors and attitudes. And I'm not here to talk to you as an expert. I'm not here to talk to you about all the research that I've done on millennials and this generation and all of that. What I am here to talk to you about is our company and the way that we build and the way that we work and how it reflects all of these things, in the hope that some of that is going to be useful to you to take back with you. Let me take 1 second and just talk to you quickly about who I am. So as you know, I work at Facebook. You might have heard of my CEO. It's not this guy. It's this guy. So Mark is 27. And just so we're clear, he may be 27, but he's hands down the smartest person I've ever worked with. It's also important for you to know that I'm only 2 years older than Mark. So I am a millennial. I'm on the edge of the generation, but I am. While we're being honest, as Daniel said, it's also important for you to know that I'm actually not an HR professional, and I don't work in HR right now. So why on earth am I here, right? Why did Bill and Daniel come ask me to talk to you guys today? In the end, it's about this role that I had for 2 years at Facebook. I used to say that it was defined by 2 questions. Number 1 is, how do we talk to the world outside about what it's like to work at Facebook? And number 2 is, as Mark would put it, who do we want to be when we grow up? I was part of building and working on this company that has millennial at our DNA. And as I said, what I want to do today is share with you what I learned in that process in the hope that it'll be helpful to you. So first I want to tell you a little bit more about Facebook, the company, and the circumstances in which we exist. We have a lot of graphs that go up and to the right. So we were founded in 2004. We will be 8 next spring. When I joined the company in June of 2008, I think we hit 80 million users that week. And about 2 weeks ago, we announced that we had 800 million users, which is crazy. Our world changes really, really, really fast. Let me explain just a little bit more about what those users look like. So when we're talking about our users, we define a user as someone that comes back to the site at least once a month. In general, that's a metric that we spend less time thinking about as a company. It's the metric that everybody hears about, but we're much more focused on that second thing, which is how many people come back once a day. So about 50% of those people come back once a day. So it's about 400 million users right now. Actually, 2 weeks ago, we also had our first day where 500 million users visited the site in a single day. They tend to share a lot. And so those next 2 things are just examples of the volume that we deal with. This is true for our servers, it's true for our infrastructure, it's true for everything. When I joined the company, I think the average age was about 28. It's definitely very different now, but it's been built by millennials. And so what I want to talk to you about is our culture and the way that we build and the way that we work. These are our values. I spend every Tuesday, I spend half an hour talking to new hires about these. And actually, for the subject that I want to talk to you about today, there's a story that underlies these values that actually is really much more related to the sort of millennial DNA that we have. But during the time that I'm talking, you're going to hear me use words like fast and open a whole bunch, just so you have the context. This is what's written on, well, to a certain extent on our walls. So these are the pillars that underlie that are on that story that underlies those values. And this is what I want to talk to you guys about today. This is our DNA. The stereotypes and the behaviors and attitudes that sort of define the millennial generation, they're embedded within this, and I'll talk about them as I go through this. So number one, you can make anything better. This is our heart as a company. I'll give you an example from our product, which Daniel already sort of started talking about. So we launched our Photos product in 2005, and all of the sort of brands and names that are on this slide existed at the time that we launched Photos. They all had a lot of features. High res, download, crop, rotate, whatever. And pretty much any MBA student would tell you that you'd be insane to launch a new Photos product into this market because it would be really, really hard to differentiate. And by the way, not only did we launch a Photos product into this market, but it definitely didn't have any of these features. And not only did it not have these features, you couldn't even rotate the photo to the right or to the left. Like whatever you uploaded it as, like the orientation, was how it stayed. But it did have this one feature, which was that you could tag your friends. And it quickly became, in 2005, the largest photo sharing site on the internet. And today, it's larger than all of the other sites combined. So what is that? This idea that you can make anything better, this idea that there might be something that people have missed. In this case, it's actually pretty simple. If you guys think about how you logically organize information in your head, when you're making a decision about where that photo was stored, like the logical thing is like not 1024.7.2.jpg, which is how a computer organizes things. The things you remember about a photo is like roughly where you were, roughly what time of year it was, and like who was in the photo with you. It's, as Daniel said, the way that we build is by taking away a lot of technology and trying to do what's natural for people. This is just one example, and it's an example both of sort of the way that we build and the way that we think about technology, which is sort of human-centric. We call it social design. But the idea of putting people at the center and trying to build technologies that are more natural for people. But the truth is, what we've learned, and it's certainly in our DNA, is that the most important thing is to ask a lot of questions. Why do these things exist? Why is it important to have high res? Is that actually the most important thing? Why are files organized this way? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We ask a lot of questions as a company. Internally, it's true as well. I'll show you some of the questions that we've asked over time. Some of these will look very familiar, but the truth is people are always asking questions at Facebook. They always demand an explanation, and it has to be logical. It's not to say that we answer these questions necessarily differently than everybody else. It doesn't mean that we do things completely differently. Sometimes you ask the question and you end up in the same place that everybody else ended up in, that did it before. But the point is that within this, sometimes there's an opportunity for innovation. Sometimes you ask the question and you come out in a really different place. This is a very important question in our culture. And I know that for those of you that do manage millennials and that are struggling with this possibly in your workforce, this is potentially a question that comes out of our mouths a lot. And again, it can be hard because you have to explain yourself over and over again. One of the things you learn really early at Facebook, regardless of who you are, is that you will have to explain your decisions. It's required. But inside of that is the opportunity for innovation. Inside of that question and the need to answer them is the opportunity to do things differently. The other thing that this has taught us from an HR perspective and the way that we manage people and just the way that we manage the company is that you can't really get away with having things that don't have a logical explanation. So when you put process in place, there has to be a reason why you're putting it in place. It has to solve an actual problem that people can see and feel and touch. Otherwise, at least in our world, they get very frustrated. So one of our principles in terms of how we build and think as a company is that process must serve a purpose. In general, we're not a very process-heavy company. We started with none, I would say. And so we've had to add it in carefully and thoughtfully over time. And so what we've come to is that the only processes, the best thing a process can do is solve a real problem. We would hypothesize that sometimes the moment when companies feel big is when they start serving the process and just following the process instead of solving the problem. And the truth is that the best process, so the process that we've ended up putting in place sort of naturally over time, are moments when people were running into each other, right? They're all doing the same thing, or they're not talking to each other, or whatever. So the best process should make you faster. Those are the ones when you explain them, everybody's like, yeah, we need that. So let's take an example from our HR world that everyone has gone through, which is reviews. So this is when we started collaborating with Rypple. When we first started thinking about what reviews should look like at Facebook, we struggled hard. There were a lot of questions. We took the paper off the walls a whole bunch of times when we were sort of designing this thing. All of these questions, sort of walked us through, what is this meant to do? What is this process meant to do for a company? And we ended up with two things. The first is that it is meant to fairly reward people for their contributions to the company. And the second is that it is meant to help people grow and get better at what they do. Those are two very different problems. And so we actually ended up with two different processes. They're related, but they're different. So the first is a biannual review process. It says performance summary process. Honestly, if this is meant to solve the fairly reward people for their contributions to the company problem, this process is about compensation. It's about taking the results that people have produced, the way they've contributed to the company, and relating that in a fair way to how they're rewarded. So we set goals twice a year as a company. We actually do bonuses twice a year. We give people the opportunity to be promoted twice a year. For our business, remember that graph that goes up and to the right? That is the right pace. Because stuff changes really fast. A year is a long time. It doesn't mean it's right for you, it's just right for us. The second thing, like I said, is kind of a different problem, which is how do you help people grow? And this is what, we were actually already working on this before I ever met Daniel, but this is what we work and have worked with Rypple on over time, which is we actually have a very feedback-heavy culture. People want to know all the time how they're doing. We'll talk about that later. I know that's a millennial thing too. But how do you take that and actually give people tools that make it faster and better and whatever? So like I said, we originally built a tool called the Thanks tool. This was just an experiment that some of our engineers did to see if we could kind of have a lightweight way of people just sharing recognition with each other so that it wasn't quite so manager heavy. And then we met Rypple and we started talking to them. And what we've done with them in the last year is basically take all of that and extend it. How do we give feedback in an ongoing way? How do we set goals in an iterative way? Because frankly, for us, we're a super heavy one-on-one culture. People meet with their managers and their peers almost every week just to check in about, hey, is this still the right stuff to be working on? Did something change? Are we still headed in the right direction? How am I doing? What we're trying to solve in this tool, honestly, is that same thing. How do we make that more leveraged? How do we make it faster? How do we help people grow? Every day, ideally. And we haven't solved it yet. I mean, this is an incredibly hard problem. And that's part of who we are as well. We're going to keep trying to solve it, even if every other company... So we have pretty high usage of this tool, and we're still not happy. But the truth is that it's really important because it's part of the learning process for us. And the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is how we learn. But part of the necessity for us is constant iteration on this. Okay, principle number 2. I'm gonna run through all of this stuff, and my hope is that I'm gonna leave some time at the end for questions, because I realize there's a lot of information in here. Okay, so principle number 2. Fast failure leads to fast learning. Somebody once told me that Facebook was a learning company, and honestly, my original reaction to that was like, learning company? That sounds kind of cheesy. And then I realized they were totally right. So millennials, there's this word needy, right? They need to know how they're doing. They need to all the time to be told whether they're doing well, whether they're doing poorly. If they're doing well, they want recognition. It's a lot, and it's every day, and it's every week, and all of that. It's something that articles have mentioned over time a lot, and it's true. For us, again, this is actually important. This is one of the things that we're best at. If you remember this graph, the truth is, and it's sort of crazy, that we can't hire people as a company that can fill a job today. Because that job is going to be dramatically bigger in a year. And actually, if you were the highest performer in the company in 2008, you might not be today. You might actually be underwater because stuff changes so fast. So learning for us is not an option. It's a necessity because we have to grow as a company, and our growth as a company depends on the aggregate growth of the people that work there. We can't wait to do this twice a year. We have to do it every day, because if we did it twice a year, it'd be like, a couple million more users, and we'd be behind. So let me talk to you guys about what learning looks like at Facebook. I'm going to use another product example. It's one of my favorites, but there are lots of examples of this. So this is a dialog box that you could probably see on the internet today. It's someone going to epicurious.com and sharing a recipe back with their friends on Facebook. This is actually from a product that we launched in 2007 called Facebook Beacon. Some of you guys may have heard of it. It did not go well. This was a really hard time for us as a company because we learned a lot of really important lessons with helping people understand what information they were sharing, making them feel like they have control over what information gets shared, etc. The way this product worked, and unfortunately it was in November of 2007, so we ended up with a lot of articles like this. Because people were going and doing things for like Christmas or the holidays, and then without understanding what was going on, they were sharing some of that information back with like the people that they bought presents for and stuff. And so your mom was like, "Thanks for the DVDs, honey." So like I said, this was not a particularly good time for us as a company. We actually ended up rolling this product back. The insane thing about this is a picture of a website today. Just a random one. Most websites today look like this. There's like 9 different ways you can share information back with different sort of sites across the internet, including Facebook. 9 months after we took Facebook Beacon back, we launched something called Facebook Connect, which allowed you to go to third-party sites and share information back to facebook.com. A year and 2 months later, we launched the like button, which you guys are probably familiar with, which allowed you to go to third-party websites and share information back with facebook.com. The reason I love this screenshot is because it's an article about, they just launched like a couple weeks ago, a reading application that encourages you to share with your friends every time you turn a page. It's a little extreme. But the point is, none of this existed when we launched Facebook Beacon. And we did some stuff wrong with Facebook Beacon, but there was a really good idea in there. Sharing has become the new norm, and we've been part of leading that on the web. And it took us a while to get it right. And who knows, I would say we're not even there yet. I mean, I think we believe we're going to keep working on this problem of how to help people share information for a long time. But there's this saying that flies around inside our company about failure, which is that most great things are the result of several previous failures. The idea behind this is that it is important to try. That it doesn't matter that you get it exactly right the first time. What matters is that you take a good idea and try, and then learn from it. And then try again, and then learn from it, and then try again. I think most companies would call this iteration. We're incredibly iterative as a company. We are a learning company, and we have to be. This is true. This is a process that we go through on our product. It's a process that we go through as individuals. We actually reward a lot of times folks that try something and maybe don't get it exactly right the first time. One of the things that's true literally about the site that you use a lot is we're pushing code every single day. When I'm saying iterative, I'm not kidding. And by the way, we actually let our interns do this as well. And we teach them how first, and we let them get to know our systems. But this is every engineer. We believe we hire engineers that are good enough that they're going to be able to be part of this process. We actually had an intern a couple of years ago who pushed some code, and it caused a bug, and it caused some problems for a bunch of users. And we actually normally give interns offers at the end of the summer, but for that intern, we gave him an offer that week. Because we wanted people to understand that to us, it's more important to try. It's more important to try and learn than it is to get it right. Like I said, iteration for us, it isn't just a thing that we do. It's essential for our business. If we don't do it, we immediately fall behind. Both because of the rate of change of our user base, but also because of the competitive space that we sit in. Learning is a necessity. So there's this word that's used a lot when talking about millennials. Entitlement. We've spent a lot of time talking about this word, particularly in HR. What does it mean? And the truth is that entitlement means someone that thinks they have a right to something. They have a right to know. They have a right to be part of a process. They have a right to be part of the decision making, whatever. And it's funny because we have a different word for this and a different way of thinking about it. And it took us a long time to realize that this is what people were talking about, which is we actually want to build a company where people believe they have a right to be part of something, a right to be part of the decision, to understand it, to be part of the conversation. We call it ownership. And it's this fundamental principle, which is that everyone should feel like it's their company. Because if they feel that way, not only are they entitled to be part of the conversation, but they're responsible for the success of the company. They're responsible for the decisions that are made and their own behaviors as part of that. How they spend money, who they hire, what they build, how they build. This, for us, is a good thing. And we actually don't go about it in the way that you might expect. It's not about stock and it's not about compensation. That isn't how we sort of engender ownership within the company. It's actually about information. So we're an incredibly open company. It's usually the first thing that people that come from other companies notice when they walk in the door is we talk about everything. Examples include, we don't have cubicles. We just have desk. Because we think there's a lot of conversations that come out of that that are really important. Next example, Mark's office is actually made of all glass. He made it that way. He doesn't ever close the curtains. He wanted people to see what was going on and to feel like there wasn't anything to hide. He also spends an hour every single Friday answering questions for the company. And anybody can ask anything that they want. And he's very adamant about people asking the hard stuff because he feels like it's important to have those conversations with the company. So we take openness seriously. It's part of what we feel like we're doing in the world. Daniel talked about some of it, but the great side benefits of people sharing information. Conversation and collaboration are a huge part of how we work as a company. We've had 100 tools over time that have basically tried to capture conversation. And honestly, where a lot of it ends up happening is on Facebook.com. We don't block Facebook.com at work. Surprising, I know. We'll talk more about that in a second. But people will publish notes and stories to Facebook, and people will talk about them there. It ends up being about a range of things, whether it's what the company's doing, what they're working on, all of that stuff. But this conversation and this iteration is really important to how we work as a company. And like I said, we think openness is a great way to take people's desire to be involved and actually make use of it, so they feel like they at least understand the decisions that are being made, so they can ask all those why questions that they need to ask, and feel like they're a part of something, like they're a part of building something that's partially theirs. Last principle. Work is personal. So I feel like everyone's worst nightmare about the millennial generation is this book. There's some stat that somebody told me, like, some ridiculous percentage of millennials have read this book. The idea of this would be that people are basically trying to get rid of work so they can get back to life. And by the way, if this is what, millennials or my generation or the next set of generations are actually trying to do, we've got problems. But honestly, it hasn't been our experience. Let me tell you about a tradition that we have as a company. So it's called a hackathon. We do them, they're not necessarily regular. We do them like about 6 times a year. Somebody just like randomly will start organizing one. And so for a hackathon, what happens is you show up at 8 p.m. and we kick it off. There's usually Chinese food and beer of some sort. And then everybody works until 6 a.m. And usually what they're working on is something that they don't have time to work on in their day-to-day job. That's right. Our idea of fun is working all night. So this is not a company where we're like trying to get out after 4 hours. That isn't the world that we see. And it's interesting because, we play hard too. That's part of it. But what was interesting when I was thinking about this is like, what we've actually found is that more important, it's not really about getting rid of work to get back to life. It might not even be about work-life balance. What we've found is that if you give smart, passionate people something that they believe in, if they buy into that mission and they're working on a product that they love, you literally have to send them home. Because it's about work that you want to give your life over to. That is not to say not to have a life, but it's about something that you're that passionate about. It's not about working 4 hours a week. The other piece of work being personal that we find to be really important is about people and about friends. So I know there are companies that block Facebook. We use it a lot. The interesting thing is we don't use it necessarily officially. So you don't it's not like you walk into the company and you immediately are friends with every single person that works with the company or anything like that. We follow the principles of the site, which is you should be friends with people that you actually know and want to be friends with. But generally speaking, over time, you start to be friends with the people that you've been in meetings with or worked on projects with or whatever. And the fascinating thing about that is that it actually makes us faster. So this is a guy that I'm friends with whose name is Boz. Boz and I haven't really worked together since 2008 when I first joined the company, but he and I are friends on Facebook. And a couple of months ago, I saw this story, which is him getting engaged to his girlfriend at the top of Mount Shasta. And I actually ran into him in the hall. So I liked this at the time, and then I ran into him in the hall, and I was like, Boz, I'm so excited for you. I saw you and Rachel, you and April. This is awesome. And we ended up in a conversation, and we were just like kind of catching up. And he was like, what are you working on? I told him, and I was asking him how his stuff was going. And then we ended up like kind of parting ways or whatever. And about a month after that, I ended up needing Boz's help on something for work for the first time in a couple of years. And normally, like if this whole thing had not happened, the email that I would send Boz would say something to the order of this. It would have to explain what I was working on. It would have to remind him who I was or whatever. And it would be formal because we didn't have that friendship. And instead, the email that I sent Boz said something like this. It was way less of my time to be able to reach out to him, and it took way less of his time to be able to respond. For us, the kind of the natural collaboration that comes out of those personal connections is massively sort of amplifying. It makes the whole company faster because people know each other. We are not sure that there should be a really strong barrier between work and personal. We think it might actually be a good thing. It might be good for collaboration and good for speed if people know each other at work. It's faster. But the other thing that's true, and I'm pretty sure all the experts would tell you this, is that it makes people happier if they feel like they work with their friends. If they feel like they know the people that they work with and that the people that they work with care about them. So those are the 4 principles. You can see now why we might think that these stereotypes have different words that describe them better, at least for us. And why the attitudes and behaviors that define this generation and that are probably only going to get more extreme once the iPad generation shows up. But the truth is we don't do this perfectly, and it's hard. And we're always working on it. We have this saying inside the company, which is that we're only 1% done. And that's definitely true on our product. We talk all the time about all the things we have left to do in the world. And it's also true inside the company. We're always going to be working on it. We're always going to be working on getting better, what it means to grow up, trying to do more of this, trying to be more loyal to who we are rather than just following process. So let me talk to you really quickly about HR at Facebook and how we build and how we think about it, since we're still working on it. We spent, actually, not surprisingly, one of the first questions that we asked is, why does HR exist? What is HR for? What is the mission of this organization that exists everywhere? What's it supposed to be doing? What's the problem that it's solving? And we spent lots of time talking about this because it was important to us to understand how to prioritize. And where we landed is actually that a people organization at its best is meant to make the rest of the organization faster. Our job should be to put process in place where it makes people faster, to take roadblocks out of the way if we possibly can, so people can do their work better. Helping people grow is part of this, because that ultimately makes the company faster as well. And honestly, the way that we build and the way that we think about tools and systems and all of that should look pretty familiar. We spend a lot of time asking questions, asking whether we can do things better than we do them today. We try things, we fail. And we spend a lot of time making sure that people do feel like they have a stake in the company and that they're part of something that they believe in. And we try as much as we can to build an organization that people are in love with and a company that people want to be part of.